In March of 1941, 3 months before Germany invaded the Soviet Union, a delegation of Soviet officers toured German tank factories. This was the strange final season of the pact between the two dictatorships, when they still traded technology and lied to each other professionally. The Germans, following orders to impress their guests, rolled out the Panzer IV, the heaviest tank in the German army. And German accounts describe what happened next, because their hosts never forgot it. The Soviet officers refused to believe it. They grew irritated. They insisted, repeatedly, that the Germans were hiding their real tanks, that this medium machine with its short gun could not possibly be the top of the line. The German engineers were baffled by the accusation. They were not hiding anything. The Panzer IV was the best they had. It took 3 more months, and the opening weeks of the largest invasion in history, for the German army to understand what that argument in the factory had actually meant. The visitors were not accusing their hosts of hiding a better tank. They were comparing the Panzer IV to something they had at home. And what they had at home was about to bounce German shells off its hull in front of horrified gun crews, stop a panzer division with a single vehicle, and drag the most celebrated tank designers of the Reich, including Ferdinand Porsche himself, out to the frozen Russian front in the 3rd week of November to crawl over a captured enemy machine with measuring tapes. When they finished, the German officers at the front gave Berlin their professional recommendation, and it is preserved in the memoirs of Germany's most famous Panzer general, in plain words: copy it. Just copy it. This is the story of the T-34, told the only way this channel tells these stories, through the testimony of the enemy. And it does not end where you think, because the same file contains the flaws, the failures, the American test report that tore this legend apart, and a final photograph of German soldiers riding the very tank their designers refused to copy, with iron crosses painted on it so their own side would not shoot them. Stay to the end, because the last line of enemy testimony in this file was spoken after the war by a German field marshal, and it settles the argument. To understand the shock, you have to understand the confidence, because in June of 1941, the German army had earned it. This was the force that had taken Poland in weeks, and France in 6. Its panzer divisions had invented a new kind of war, and its intelligence picture of Soviet armor was reassuring. The Red Army's tanks, as far as Berlin knew, were the light BT series and the T-26, thin-skinned, gasoline-fueled machines the Germans had already met in Spain, and their own guns opened them like ration tins. The invasion plan assumed the tanks of the enemy were a known quantity. Guderian, the architect of the Panzer Force himself, later wrote that Hitler told him that if he had known the true figures of Russian tank strength, he would not have started the war. Keep that sentence in your pocket. The German army walked into Russia believing it had seen the enemy's arsenal. It had seen the enemy's past. The future showed up in the first days. Scattered along the front, German units began reporting contact with a tank that matched nothing in the recognition handbooks. Sloped all over, wide-tracked, fast, with a gun that cracked like nothing the light Soviet tanks carried. The reports read like exaggerations, and the men writing them knew it, so they wrote down numbers instead. Here is the arithmetic that broke the handbook. The standard German anti-tank gun of 1941 was the 37mm Pak-36, a fine weapon against everything Germany had fought so far. The T-34's front plate was 45mm of steel, which sounds beatable, except the plate was laid back at a steep slope, roughly 60 degrees. Slope does 2 things to an incoming shell. It thickens the armor along the shell's path, so those 45mm behaved closer to double, and it invites the shot to glance, to skid off like a stone off a frozen pond instead of biting. German crews watched their tracers strike the glacis of this new machine and ricochet upward, glowing, into the sky. One German report described a single T-34 absorbing more than 20 hits from 37mm guns and driving on. and the German infantry, who have a gift for naming things, gave their own anti-tank gun a new title that stuck for the rest of the war. They called it the Hirasanklopfgerät, the Army's door-knocking device. It could knock on the T-34 all day. Nobody inside was obliged to answer, and the door knocked back. The gun in that sloped turret was a 76mm piece that outranged and outhit the main armament of every German tank in the field in 1941. The Panzer III carried a 37 or a short 50. The Panzer IV, the heaviest tank in the German army, remember, carried a short 75, built for lobbing high explosive, not for dueling armor, which meant the T-34 could open a conversation at ranges where the Panzers could not yet reply, and end it before they closed the distance. Underneath, the Soviet machine rode on tracks nearly twice the width of its German counterparts, spreading its weight across mud and snow like a snowshoe, in a country that, as the Wehrmacht was about to learn twice a year, is made of mud and snow. And in the engine bay sat the detail that made German engineers stare. A V12 diesel, cast in aluminum, powerful, torquey, and far harder to set alight than the gasoline engines in every German tank. Even its ancestry carried an insult. The suspension that let it fly across country descended from designs by an American engineer named Walter Christie, whose own army had shown him the door, and whose ideas the Soviets had quietly bought and perfected. The most feared tank of 1941 was a Soviet machine with an American spring in its step, meeting a German army that had been told it did not exist. If you want a single scene for what the heavy end of this shock felt like, the file offers one from the very first week, and I will label it precisely because this channel's audience checks. The tank in this story is not a T-34. It is a KV, the T-34's heavier sibling, even thicker, even ruder to German shells. And it matters here because it announced the same message at higher volume. At Raseiniai in Lithuania in the last week of June 1941, a single K5 rolled onto the supply road behind the spearhead of the German 6th Panzer Division and stopped. That is all it did. It sat on the road. For a full day, by the account of the German commander on the scene, General Raus, that one tank held the lifeline of an entire panzer division. Anti-tank guns were wheeled up and opened fire. The KV destroyed them. By Raus's account, an 88 was brought forward. The KV killed it before it could be brought to bear. Shells that hit the tank left dents and scorch marks, described by the Germans who inspected it later like fingerprints in clay. It took a coordinated production, tanks staging a diversion, engineers with demolition charges, and the 88 finally getting its shot to end it. One vehicle, one road, one day, one division stopped. The war was 5 days old, and the German army had already met armor. Its handbook said could not exist. Now, before the legend runs away with the episode, this channel owes you the other half of the file, because the audience this channel respects will supply it in the comments anyway, and they will be right. Here is the uncomfortable truth of 1941. Germany won the battles that year, won them enormously against an enemy that owned, at the invasion's start, hundreds of these superior machines and more arriving monthly. How, if the tank was that good? Because the tank was ahead of its army. Climb inside the 1941 T-34 and the miracle gets cramped. The turret held 2 men, which meant the commander was also the gunner, a man trying to read the battle, direct his driver, choose targets, and lay the gun all at once, a one-man band in a steel drum. His optics were markedly worse than the superb German sights. His radio, in most tanks that year, did not exist. The majority of T-34s, coordinated by signal flags, waved from open hatches in battle. His training was often measured in days. His transmission was so temperamental in early production that accounts describe tanks driving to the front with a spare transmission lashed to the engine deck, luggage for a breakdown foretold. And above him, Soviet doctrine in that catastrophic year fed tanks into battle in packets. unsupported, to be flanked and shot from the sides by German crews who fought like an orchestra against soloists. So hold both truths, because both are documented and both are the point. The T-34 was the best tank of 1941, and 1941 was the year of its slaughter. The design was a decade ahead. The army around it was a year behind. German tactical skill beat Soviet engineering all summer, and the German professionals doing the beating were precisely the ones who understood, with growing dread, what would happen when the army caught up with its machine. The dread got a date and a place in October, at a town called Mtsensk, on the road to Moscow. There, a Soviet tank commander named Katukov, leading the 4th Tank Brigade, did something new. He used T-34s the way the manual of the future would, hiding them, ambushing, hitting the flank of the 4th Panzer Division, and vanishing before the counterblow. The division was mauled, and this time the after-action report went up the chain to a reader whose opinion Berlin could not dismiss, because he had practically invented the Panzer arm. Heinz Guderian wrote that at Mtsensk, the vast superiority of the T-34 to the German tanks was demonstrated plainly, and his response was not a request for more guns or more men. He demanded that Berlin send a commission to the front, immediately, to see the enemy machine with its own eyes. Sit with how unusual that is. The most famous tank general of the most successful tank army on Earth, 4 months into a victorious campaign, writing to his capital, in effect, stop designing. Come here, look at theirs. And they came. In the 3rd week of November, 1941, with the temperature falling and the front barely 200 miles from Moscow, one of the strangest field trips in engineering history arrived at Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army. Officials of the Army Ordnance Office, and alongside them the elite of German tank design, names like Ferdinand Porsche, with engineers representing Daimler-Benz, MAN, and Henschel, the men whose drawing boards defined the Panzer Force, standing in the Russian snow, crawling over shot-up, captured, and abandoned T-34s with tape measures and notebooks, while the war grumbled within earshot. They measured the slope of the glacis. They studied the wide tracks and the ground pressure. They examined the aluminum diesel that their own industry, starved of aluminum by the Luftwaffe's appetite, could not simply reproduce. And they interviewed the frontline officers, the men who had spent 5 months being on the receiving end. What those officers told the commission is preserved in Guderian's own memoir, and it remains one of the most remarkable sentences a victorious army has ever produced about an enemy weapon. The officers at the front, Guderian wrote, were of the opinion that the T-34 should simply be copied, not studied, not answered, copied. Germany, the nation whose engineering was its religion, being advised by its own combat officers to photocopy a Soviet tank. That is enemy testimony of the highest grade, delivered under oath of experience, at the front, in writing. Berlin said no, and the reasons for the no, both preserved in the record, tell you everything about how empires lose technical wars. Reason 1 was practical and real. The copy was impossible on German terms. The heart of the T-34 was that aluminum diesel, and Germany's aluminum was spoken for by aircraft. Its industry could not mass produce the engine, and a T-34 without its engine is a shape. Reason 2, and Guderian records it with audible disgust, was pride. As he told it, the designers took umbrage. Copying an enemy machine was beneath the profession. So the commission split the difference and ordered something more German, not a copy, but an answer. 2 firms competed to build it. And here, the file turns briefly comic, because Daimler-Benz took the assignment literally and produced a design that looked so much like a T-34 sloped hull, similar silhouette, that the record shows real concern. German gunners would mistake it for the enemy and shoot it. And Hitler, of all people, initially liked it anyway. The contract went instead to MAN's design, larger, heavier, more complex, more German. It got a predator's name, the Panther. On paper, the answer to the T-34. In steel, one of the most formidable tanks of the war, eventually. But the file we are reading is a ledger, and the ledger now demands the bill for that no. The bill came due at Kursk in July of 1943, the greatest armored battle ever fought, where the Panther made its combat debut after a development sprint that skipped the boring parts. Roughly 200 Panthers were committed. Within days, by most accounts, only a few dozen still ran. Soviet guns claimed their share, but the Panther's deadliest enemies at Kursk wore no uniform. Final drives that stripped themselves, engines that caught fire on the march, a masterpiece rushed out of the oven, half-baked. Guderian, by then responsible for the Panzer Force's recovery, wrote assessments of the debut that no press office would have released. The tank designed to answer the T-34 spent its first battle proving that the fastest way to lose armor is to build it too clever to finish. And while the answer was breaking down, the question was multiplying. Because the deepest genius of the T-34 was never the slope or the diesel. It was a decision about arithmetic. The Soviet Union treated the tank not as a masterpiece to be perfected, but as a product to be poured, simplifying it year after year for production, until by some accounts, the labor hours to build one had fallen from roughly 8,000 toward 4,000. In the relocated plants beyond the Urals, in facilities the workers called Tankograd, the lines ran day and night. Across the war, the Soviet Union built more than 50,000 T-34s, the most produced tank of the entire conflict. Germany built roughly 6,000 Panthers. For every answer, 8 questions. And now the second honesty beat, because this channel's rule is that the testimony cuts every direction, including against the legend. In late 1942, the Soviets shipped a T-34 to their American allies for evaluation at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and the resulting criticisms, preserved in a Soviet summary of the American findings, whose exact wording historians still argue over, were brutal. Crude machining, sloppy assembly, a transmission the testers despised, an air cleaner so ineffective, the report's language about it has become famous among tank historians for its rudeness. The Americans were not wrong, and neither were the Germans who outfought it in 1941, and neither were the German officers who begged to copy it. All of the testimony is true at once, and holding it together is the actual lesson of this machine. The T-34 was not the best-made tank of the war. It was the best decided tank of the war. Every crudeness the Aberdeen testers cataloged was the price of a factory somewhere pouring 3 more hulls that week. Its designers traded finish for numbers, comfort for slope, refinement for a diesel that ran in the cold that froze German engines solid. Good enough everywhere, on time. Perfection lost that argument in the snow outside Moscow, and it lost it again at Kursk. And the 2 tanks that embody each side of the argument are still argued about in comment sections, which is where I will formally place the question, because it deserves a proper fight. Was the T-34 the best tank of the Second World War, or just the right one? And is that the same thing? The armor community has been at war over that sentence for 80 years. The comments below are now the front line, and while you are down there, the Panther question is open too, because to this day, historians and enthusiasts argue how much T-34 is in the Panther's blood, an answer or a heavily disguised copy, and both sides have receipts. The file closes with 2 exhibits, and this channel could not have invented either. Exhibit 1 is a photograph that exists in many versions across the Eastern Front. German soldiers, Wehrmacht, and Waffen-SS units riding into battle on T-34s. Captured ones, repaired ones, pressed into German service under the designation the Germans gave their war booty, with one field modification made everywhere and urgently. German crosses painted on the hull and turret, oversized, sometimes almost comically large, because the silhouette of a T-34 made every German gunner's hands twitch, and the new owners did not care to be the punchline. The army whose designers refused on professional honor to copy the T-34, spent the rest of the war driving it secondhand, wearing name tags so its own side would hold fire. The copy was never built in Germany. It was merely captured, one tank at a time. And Exhibit 2 is a sentence, spoken after the war was over, when the testimony had nothing left to protect. Field Marshal Ewald von Kleist, one of the senior German commanders of the entire Eastern War, was asked by his interviewers about the enemy's equipment, and his verdict on the T-34 survives in 5 words: "The finest tank in the world." That is the last entry in the enemy's file. Shells bouncing in the summer of 1941. A lone giant on the Raseiniai road. A door-knocking device. The greatest tank general of the age, summoning his country's best designers to the snow. The officers at the front, on the record, copy it. The refusal, the answer, breaking down at Kursk, while the question rolled off the lines 50,000 strong. An Allied test report full of insults, every one of them true and none of them mattering. Iron crosses painted on Soviet steel, and a German field marshal, at the end of it all, handing the enemy machine the title. The verdict on the T-34 was never written in Moscow. It was written by the men it fought, which is the only verdict this channel trusts. If your family has armor stories from that front, either side of it, the comments on this file are open, and they are read. Name the machine the enemy should testify about next, one name down below, and subscribe, because the next witness this channel calls is already on the stand. The most feared jet of the Cold War, the plane that terrified the Pentagon for a decade, until the day a defector handed one over. American engineers opened it up and found something inside that nobody on either side was prepared to admit.